What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel where we learn, do, and talk about photography until we're sick of it. You're looking at me on two cameras today, which we're sort of pitting against each other. The venerable Canon EOS R7 hybrid mirrorless stills mirrorless camera, which I've sort of built a micro production house around over the last year, and the Canon EOS C200 digital cinema camera, a dedicated video camera that came out in 2017 at a price tag of like $7,500, but I picked up recently used for $1,900 to supplement my R7 for those situations where video quality was like absolutely paramount, specifically the high dynamic range scene. So today I'm going to be doing a few common tests with these two cameras so that I can sort of feel out the contours of the strengths and weaknesses of each one and see which camera is best to use in which situation. But I also sort of wanted to refresh the information that's available on YouTube, because when I was researching the Canon C200, most of the comparison footage was against the milieu of cinema cameras that it was released in its price point, whereas I think a shopper today would be more in the situation that I was in, comparing it to the modern complement of hybrid mirrorless cameras. And at the end of the video, I will also be comparing the C200 to a full frame competitor that you might be shopping for at the same price point, and share my experiences from a couple of months of using these cameras side by side as a video kit. So be sure to stay tuned to the end of the video for that. So what are we looking at right now? Although the C200 shoots 12-bit RAW video, both cameras are in their C-Log3 profile. This is a test to see how the cameras react to a quick grade. So you are seeing the technical LUT applied to both cameras. So I set exposure on the R7 using an 18% gray card at 40% IRE. That's the Canon recommended exposure for C-Log3. And you can see how the footage is graded in that quick turnaround scenario, although I almost never grade video that way. I thought you might appreciate this test, and if you do, be sure to drop a thumbs up on the video. The R7 is shooting in its 4K fine mode at 24 frames per second. Both cameras are exposed for a 50th of a second at ISO 800 and f11, which is the exposure that I got in this lighting situation. Both cameras are set to 5,000 Kelvin color temperature. The C200 is shooting in its UHD 4K mode, which is the mode that you get when you're shooting in C-Log3. So I'll roll off the grades now so that you can see what that looks like. This is what the C-Log3 looks like, properly exposed right out of the camera. But more commonly, I will sort of flex the exposure to maintain detail in something or other, and then see how much I can recover in the scene. And I'm going to test the cameras that way next. Okay, what you're seeing now is a test with each camera underexposed by 4 stops. And so the R7 is set to an 800th of a second shutter speed, and I've put the C200 with 4 stops of ND, which is just faster than switching it out of shutter angle and setting the shutter speed. And I'm letting you see the scene like this, and I will briefly walk through it, even though I suspect the cameras will have some difficulty autofocusing here, and I don't have a great way out here in the field to manually set the focus in the correct location. But hopefully this gives you some sense of the detail you can pull out of this scene with the human subject in C-Log3. It's notable that the R7 shoots C-Log3 in 10-bit 422, and the C200 can only shoot C-Log3 in an 8-bit 420. And so this was one test that I was very interested in, because as I was researching example footage of the C200, I did notice that the 8-bit C-Log3 footage looked really, really good, and a lot better than other 8-bit cameras that I've used, and even better than some 10-bit 422 C-Log3 cameras that I've used. So I just wanted to see what was possible here, and I'm just staying out just long enough to let the light come in a little bit so we can see how the highlights and shadows are doing in the grid. Next, we'll try out the C200 in RAW and see how that stacks up to the 10-bit footage from the R7. Okay, while I was waiting for some more challenging light, let me see if I can, probably not even anywhere close to in focus, but I'll try to maintain myself within the confines of this focus box. You ever realize it would be a great day to have worn a hat a bit too late? I went ahead and set the C200 into shutter speed mode, and so now I've got both cameras at, well, I think given the incremental difference, the C200 is at a 420th of a second and the R7 is at a 400th of a second. So that's how I'm matching exposure between the cameras right now. And the C200 is also now shooting in RAW, if you noticed a difference there. So the reason that I started out the video with the LUT test was because I wanted to sort of take my skills as a novice colorist out of the equation And so hopefully we got the best comparison between the capabilities of the cameras themselves with that first test. But of course, this is raw, and so I have had to manually grade the footage. I'll roll that grade off now so you can see what the log footage looks like. Will be in C-Log 3 in the R7. The C200 is spitting out something in the log 2 gamma. We'll roll that grade back on. Catch up with you in the studio so we can talk about my experience grading the footage and using the cameras. So I'll see you there. Okay, back in the studio. Sorry for the mess. I've actually been shipping out a book. If you didn't catch it on my social media feeds, I've got a short story published in a local short story anthology. You can get that on my website if you have reading time. MattRamsey.gallery, or use a link in the video description. Here, I'll read you an excerpt. No, I'm kidding. I won't do that. We'll talk about these cameras. So I just finished producing the timeline that you just watched, and I'll share my thoughts with you now after having worked through the footage and done the color grading. What should I stipulate? First, this is probably the hardest YouTube video I've ever made. I initially devised this as a 3-camera shootout, and that turned out to be too overwhelming for me, and narrowed the scope down to the 2 cameras that we saw in the field. But that initial concept kind of required that like all 3 cameras are in an uncontrolled lighting situation, all rolling at the same time on the same subject, so the footage could be as closely matched as possible. And that required that I use a different lens on every camera. And so that's the first thing that I want to say. I do have some footage from the Canon EOS R6 as well compared to the C200, and I will share that with you in just a second. But you'll notice that like the lens is flaring on the R6 and it's not flaring on the C200, so it kind of makes the comparison a little uneven. Just something to keep in mind if you'd like to see a comparison in a more controlled situation where the same lens can be changed between different cameras. Leave a comment and I'll try to produce that for you if that would be helpful in your purchasing decision. But back to this footage, I think in the comparison, in this iteration of the comparison, I think that I was able to control it closely enough that the lens was not a huge factor, but I was on one camera using the EF 50mm f1.8 lens. That was on the R7, and on the C200, which I can show you a little bit because the R7's filming me, you know what a mirrorless camera looks like. This is the C200, and on this I had fitted up an older Tamron 24-70 f2.8. So let's talk a little bit about the footage. The first clip we had up was the comparison using the technical LUTs. So in my opinion, neither camera produced a really stellar result in this instance. And like I said, this isn't normally the way that I shoot or grade footage, and this is the reason why. But you see that the sky is completely washed out. And aside from a slight difference in color between the 2 cameras, which would essentially be a matter of preference, my preference is very slightly for the colors in the C200. There's a little bit less of that orangeness in the skin, and so I think it just looks a little more, the footage looks a little more serious. So I think maybe that's something to take note of when considering using the cameras side by side. Not necessarily a reason to choose one camera over the other. So in the second test where I underexposed each camera and then tried to raise the shadows in the grade, again, not a great result from either camera in their C-Log 3 profiles. The C200 was quite a bit noisier, but I thought generally more color accurate and better detail in the shadows. The R7, I would say, produced a cleaner result, but less color accurate. It's the opposite. Okay. Coming into the raw video comparison, obviously this is where the C200 shines. That's the reason I bought it, but it's good to see that it was justified. You can draw your own conclusions about the footage. I really didn't think the R7 did terribly in this side-by-side comparison. The light conditions changed a little to sort of favor the camera, so the sky was not as bright in this. You can see that the sky is not as detailed in the R7, and I actually, in grading it, I tried to give the camera every advantage possible, and the sky is sort of has a little bit of a softening going on, but in the C200, the sky is really sharp and detailed, plus what I was able to pull out of the shadows looked fantastic. Lots of detail in the subject, and I was able to sort of really shape the curves to get the toning effect that I was looking for in the face, my face. But I will say there probably was a little bit more noise in the C200, but that noise could clean up really easily to make the footage look good, not just like salvageable as a last resort. And that's all very reassuring because, like I said, I did pay nearly $2,000 for this camera, and I'm not fooling myself. This is I know not like the be-all end-all of my photography needs. It satisfies a very specific need in a very specific but necessary circumstance for like a very small price. Hopefully over the next year or 2 years, I can save up to get a more general purpose camera. And so that really is like the only thing that I might fault this camera for if you're considering it. If I had to choose between only having this camera or the R7, I would definitely choose the R7. It gave a good or sometimes even better result in most circumstances, whereas the C200 has been a stellar tool over the last few months to serve a very specific need, namely for me, the outdoor interview. Lastly, I said that I did have some comparison footage with the Canon R6 if you're considering a full frame camera. Right, with that stipulation that I mentioned, be sure you're keeping in mind the lensing trouble, so we're not looking at it too closely for color, but if you just want to see the example, I'm happy to share it with you, and then I'll close out the video as well with some footage that I made taking the C200 out into the woods, handheld on a hike, because I've been curious to see, you know, how in how many situations that I would normally use a mirrorless camera could I potentially use this as well. And I actually had a fantastic hike with the camera. I got some raw footage that I really enjoyed, and I enjoyed grading it too, kind of like grading a landscape photo. So I'll close out the video with all that stuff. And until I see you guys next time, keep an eye out and a foot forward, and thanks for watching. Bye.